Thanks for tuning in. This is George Masri, and you're listening to the Well Off Podcast. It's the first time I mispronounced my name ever. But today I interviewed Kyle Melko from Acumen Insurance Group. I have interviewed him before, so this was the second time, but we actually discussed a lot of important things, especially with the way things are today. So we talked about the importance of tenants insurance. Why do you need your tenants to have it? How does it benefit you? What are some of the risks associated with not having it? We talk about rental income replacement programs for non-paying tenants. We talk about insurance coverage for drugs, drug operations from your tenants, knob and tube, aluminum wiring coverage. We talked about Airbnb insurance, and then also we talked about student rental and rooming house insurance. I'm having a hard time speaking today. So if you're interested in finding out a little bit more, I know insurance isn't always the best topic to listen to or get information about, but it is really important. It's important for you guys to understand it and know the risks associated with it. So I hope you will benefit from listening to this podcast. And if you do, I ask you to share it with somebody, a friend, a family member, and also leave us a review, especially on the Apple Podcast platform. So you could do that on your iPhone, you could do it on your MacBook or on your iPad. And finally, if you are interested in learning a little bit more about real estate investing, I encourage you to go to welloff.ca. There are some free reports that you could download there, and there's a whole bunch of other information, so you could check it out and contact me if you'd like to chat. Always working on new opportunities, 4 to 6 unit buildings, Welland, St. Catharines, and Hamilton. So there's always something brewing there, and I'm sure it would be great to connect with you. So I look forward to it, and enjoy the episode. Welcome to the WAV Podcast, where the goal is to motivate, inspire, and share success principles. I'm here with Kyle Melko with Acumen Insurance Group. For those that don't know, this is actually the second time I speak to Kyle. He was also on a lot earlier when the podcast first started. So Kyle has been an insurance broker for about 7 years now, and he's been with Acumen for 7 years, and he's been working in the insurance industry for over 10 years. So Kyle, for the second time, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. So glad to be back.
Always great to have you. So why don't we get right into it? I have a couple questions for you that I think are going to be helpful to a lot of people. This is actually something that I asked about recently because this is stuff you hear about, but I didn't really know the reason why. So tenants insurance,
right?
Why is it important for your tenants to get liability/content insurance?
So I think the one reason that always seems to be overlooked is when there's a claim and your tenant's going to be displaced for 2 weeks, a month, 2 months while repairs are being done, the cost of them to live elsewhere could be higher than what they are paying you in rent. So in the event of a claim, they're going to be displaced for a month. So they're not going to pay you that rent during that month because you can't provide them housing. They're going to have to live somewhere else. So you're going to reimburse them the rent, or they're not going to pay you the rent that they normally pay you. Mm-hmm. But where they go to live, say it's an Airbnb or a hotel, it may be twice the cost of their normal living cost. So simple math, we'll say they're paying you $1,000 a month in rent, and it's going to cost them $2,000 to live in a hotel for a month. That additional cost, we always hear about tenants going back to the landlord and saying, well, this is your fault that I can't live here. You should be picking up the additional costs, and it just causes tension between the landlord and the tenant that can be avoided. So how you can avoid that is to make sure they have tenants insurance in place, because that additional living cost or additional living expense, as we like to refer to it, would be picked up by their tenants insurance policy. Cool. So the standard answer that we always get back, or that tenants are giving to landlords, is, well, I don't own much, so I don't see the need for tenants insurance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then landlords typically don't tend to push the issue too much, or they forget about it for one reason or another. It gets forgotten, and then that situation arises. And then landlords are saying, well, is this covered? Is it not? Well, yes, the rent that you'd normally be collecting is covered. You'll be reimbursed for that, but not the additional cost that the tenant faces to live somewhere else while the repairs are being done.
Sure. And on the flip side, what are the benefits to the tenants for getting that insurance? Excuse me.
Yeah, so the tenants have the benefit of having their additional living expenses covered. The landlord also mitigates their risk in regards to any sort of liability that the tenant may have, and your policy, your insurance company may have the ability to go after the tenant in the event that their tenant is responsible for it, and have the cost of your claim reduced. But the advantages to the tenant are really that any additional living expenses for them would be covered. Any contents, which can add up quicker than they think, would be repaired or replaced. And they're really not really out of pocket for anything, because those expenses can add up quickly.
So let's give an example. Tenants cooking something and it causes a fire, and all of a sudden there is $25,000 worth of damage. The insurance company, the landlord's insurance company, might go after the tenants for that claim. And if the tenants don't have insurance, then they could be potentially liable to come up with that money out of pocket.
Typically, when there's nothing, typically if there's an insurance policy there, and it goes to court, or there is a way to subrogate back against the tenant, it can be done by your insurance company, which is all taken care of behind the scenes. You don't get to see much of that as the landlord. But if there's nothing there, it typically just becomes, well, there's not much, there's no assets, so there's no sort of financial aspect for the landlord's insurance company to go after. So it just usually becomes nothing at that point. But when there is tenant's insurance policy in place and the tenant is fully responsible or partially responsible for what happened, it can alleviate the total cost of your claim, which helps you in the long run in the event that you need to shop your insurance or you need to move your insurance. A smaller claim on your record is much better than seeing a larger claim on there. From an underwriting standpoint.
Sure. And there are situations where a tenant might cancel their policy, like they get it initially because you make it a requirement and then they cancel it soon after. Is there a way for a landlord to know if the policy has been canceled by the tenants?
So we always recommend to check in on that on an annual basis. Typically would be the move-in date of when they moved in. So the nice part is you're probably renewing their lease or doing some sort of checkup to that effect on an annual basis, whether it's the usual rent increases or things like that. So that's a good time to just verify that they have insurance. If you're using the standard Ontario lease agreement, there is a clause in there that does require them to have at least liability insurance. And the nice part is those packages aren't really sold as just liability. There will be some property insurance for them. So if you're using the standard lease agreement, you do have the ability to require the insurance portion, and checking in on that on an annual basis would be your best option, without bothering them every month to make sure the policy is in place. That's really kind of best practice, would be once a year to check in to see if they have insurance.
Cool. So just call the company and ask them if the policy is still active.
Yeah, you can even just ask your tenant to provide proof of insurance. We can provide a confirmation of insurance. So they don't have to worry about disclosing what they're paying, any other private information that they don't want to disclose. We can simply provide a certificate of insurance or a confirmation of insurance that they can provide to their landlord that shows, I have liability insurance, I have some contents insurance.
Cool.
And those are provided at no additional charge. So there's no cost to the tenant, and they usually can be produced pretty quickly by any insurance office.
All right. So let's shift gears a little bit. Obviously right now, as I'm sure you're aware, the non-payment of rent is a huge issue.
Right.
And I don't think a lot of people know whether or not there is an insurance policy out there that would cover that type of situation. And I don't even know if insurance companies are willing to take on that kind of risk right now. Are you aware of any policies that would cover just non-payment of rent, like deliberate non-payment or whatever, for whatever reason from tenants?
I know a while ago there was one company offering that coverage. I haven't heard much lately if it's still available or not. It is a very thorough process to obtain that policy. It involves like credit checks on your tenants, different things like that. There's deductibles involved. It seemed, I did explore it a couple times for a couple clients, and we didn't make it through the entire process because for one reason or another, there's tenants that don't want to provide the information or other factors where it just didn't make sense for the time and energy and money involved to go forward with the policy. And I'm not sure if that policy is even available still, but from my experience, there was only one company offering it in the past, but obviously it is becoming a big challenge for for landlords right now for one reason or another. So, yeah.
So not really, our hands are tied. Not much that we can do.
Yeah, it's an unfortunate situation, and hopefully things are back to normal sooner than later.
Yeah.
Um,
So that's it, Kyle. That's all. We just got to take the non-payment.
yeah, you got to make sure, and you guys know better than the rest, to just be diligent with delivering your eviction notices and everything like that. And obviously the courts are backed up or closed, or any of those things are affecting how people can collect their rent. But as you know, the best thing, and even just when it comes to the insurance portion, just communicate with your tenants as best as possible, right?
Yeah.
And try to come up with as best of a solution as you can.
Fair enough. Okay. So again, switching gears here. What about drug operations? You own a rental property. Your tenants got a grow up going, marijuana grow up, even though you're allowed to have a couple plants, but let's just say they have a basement full or something.
Right.
What's the procedure there? What happens?
So a lot of policies will exclude any sort of illegal activity if it results in a claim. The biggest exposure I see when it comes to sort of, especially when people are growing marijuana, is the mold and things like that develop in the house, right? And mold would be excluded under any policy that you find in the market because it is something that occurs and develops over time. It's not something that's sudden and accidental, like a burst pipe or something like that, right? So from that standpoint, we always recommend to be as proactive as possible. Obviously make it as clear as possible that those things are not allowed, which it goes without saying that growing marijuana in a house is illegal, but regular physical inspections, if you can, right? Every 30 days or 60 days, if you can get into the house. I know a couple landlords that I know their trick is to go into the house and to say they're performing regular inspections on the smoke detectors and carbon monoxide detectors, right? And that gives them the opportunity to get in and make sure that there's nothing illegal going on.
Sure.
So it's something to be aware of. If they start a fire, it might be covered. It really depends. Really consult with your broker to see if any sort of indirect losses from the illegal activities are covered. But it can be an area where you need to be cautious of and really be diligent in making sure that those things aren't going on in your properties.
Sure. And what about damage to the property? The tenant is pissed off because you're evicting them the day before or a couple days before they leave. They end up destroying your property. What happens there? Is that covered under an insurance policy typically?
Yeah. So we have companies that do offer vandalism by tenants coverage for an additional charge. So it is available out there. Once again, something to definitely discuss with your broker to see what your options are. Typically, it's an optional coverage, so it's not going to be included automatically on most policies. So always check with your broker to see what the options are there. And if you suspect any sort of damage, make sure you just get it reported as soon as possible. Because what you want to avoid is if it's multiple occurrences of vandalism by tenants, it could be treated as multiple claims, even if you're reporting it all at the same time to the insurance company, which could be subject to multiple deductibles. So if you want to make sure that just gets reported as diligently as possible.
Okay. So just to clarify that, Kyle, let's say I go over today and I see that the tenant broke some of the kitchen cabinets, and then I go 3 weeks from now and I notice they put a hole in the ceiling, and then I go another time and there's something else that you're saying that could be potentially 3 separate claims.
Yeah, exactly. So what you want to do is anytime that you notice any damage and you feel like it's worth putting in a claim. So keep in mind, typically your deductible would apply. But, if they do substantial damage to, walls in a house or maybe the AC unit, electrical box, things that could be quite costly. Just get it reported right away. Don't say, they're getting evicted in a couple months, or they're going to be leaving in a few months. I'll just wait till it's all said and done and then get this all straightened out. We've seen where an adjuster goes in and treats that as separate occurrences, and then each occurrence is subject to its own deductible. And when you start to add all that up, it doesn't make sense at that point to put in a claim because you are paying a deductible on each incident.
Yeah. Okay. I would imagine there would be some cases where a person in that situation might just not keep a log and just say, hey, I just noticed that all of these things are screwed up.
Yeah. So in that case, usually you'll see an adjuster go in. If they have the opportunity, they're going to speak to the tenant to get their take on it. Which if they're doing that stuff to the property, I don't think they're going to be giving the answers that benefit you the most. And they'll also maybe interview other tenants of the building if it's a multi-unit situation to get a general idea of how the property was being treated or maintained. And then of course they're going to speak to you, and you obviously have to be aware of not telling the truth and the consequences of that. So
Yeah, for sure.
best case, best practice is to just inspect the property regularly if you can. If you suspect any vandalism or damage, definitely document and report that stuff as soon as possible.
Well, with the lockdowns, I'm sure that some people have not been able to do their regular inspections.
Right.
Is our insurance companies taking that into, or sorry, factoring that in at all, or is it just like, hey, no, you're supposed to do your inspections?
Some companies have conditions in regards to how often you have to inspect the property or have someone on your behalf inspect the property. If you wanted to be extremely diligent and you're not able to enter the property for one reason or another, technology is a wonderful thing these days. So if you have a good relationship with your tenant, or if you have the ability to send photos of the property, you know, it doesn't take a lot of effort to snap a picture of each room, or you know, snap a picture of the important areas, the roof, any sort of electrical, mechanical situations, just to give you an idea. It's not something that needs to be reported directly every 30 or 60 days to the insurance company, but if you, at least if you have a log of, you know, there was no damage to the roof, there was, you know, there's no signs of water damage in the house, everything's in working order, it's it can work to your benefit to have that documented.
Sure, but smoke alarms can't really do much about that, right? You'd have to like physically.
Not really. I guess you could get them to take a. For sure, they might be able to send you a quick video of them testing it. But yeah, it always wouldn't be in your best interest to have you there firsthand checking that kind of stuff to make sure it's working.
Okay, cool.
A lot of companies. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, so what about cigarettes? Like smoking in the unit, even though it might be against the rules of the building. And the reason I say that is because heavy smoking could cause damage to the property. It could stain the walls. It could cause all sorts of different issues. So is there anything in the policy that would cover that kind of thing? Or in a typical policy?
Yeah, I don't think you would be able to find coverage for that as sort of like damage by tenants, because the vandalism's they're going to want to see it be some sort of malicious act against the property. I don't think they're going to deem smoking a malicious act. There's a perfect situation of if you can get in there on a regular basis, or if you're you are concerned that the tenant is smoking in the unit, obviously consult with your lease agreement or to see what your options are there. But
there's other options aside from the insurance.
Coverage. If they start a fire, that would be covered. But any sort of smoke damage or, you know, the regular buildup from that, I don't see where you'd have much luck with your insurance policy getting that.
Fair enough. Okay. Now, what about knob and tube and aluminum wiring? I know that some insurance companies don't cover that kind of thing. Can you tell us a little bit about that coverage?
Yeah, so we have actually a few companies that have become a little more open-minded when it comes to the aluminum wiring. If they know that it's been pigtailed properly, been inspected, if the ESA can provide some sort of satisfactory report. Knob and tube is still kind of on the blacklist for insurance companies. But we do have companies that will give you say 60 days, 30 days to have that replaced if you have some sort of plan in place to have that repaired. It is not something that is overall good for the property. It will fail at some point, whether it's right away or in the long run. So knob and tube, it's not something that you can't get insurance for. It can be more costly and typically something that they don't want to insure long term. So there is options out there. Definitely speak to someone.
But what if you're not aware? Like you assume that or like, let's say you buy a place and the listing says that the electrical is updated, and then there's a fire in the property because of knob and tube wiring behind the walls that you weren't aware of. What can happen in that situation?
So in that case, there is the chance that the insurance company may deny the claim. It is a risk. As you know, there are risks associated with buying an older home. And obviously, even a good home inspector or electrician may not be able to confirm if there is any knob and tube wiring in the house, right? So that is there is a risk associated with buying a house that you may be concerned has some knob and tube wiring. But definitely something to consult with an electrician. Definitely something to consult with a home inspector even to see what their take is on if there is any knob and tube. Typically, those things can be remediated cheaper than people think in small amounts, right? But to be completely honest, there is a small chance that the insurance company would deny a claim in the event that there was some active knob and tube involved in starting a fire, things like that.
Sure. It'd be probably a case by case situation. And in that scenario, you would probably have to prove that you really weren't aware of it and that, I don't know, like I'm just speaking hypothetically, I'm just kind of speaking out loud here, right? There'd have to be some sort of proof and whatnot. I'm sure it's a whole process.
Yeah, these days we don't see a ton of fire related claims. Most of the stuff we see is water related.
Yeah.
But obviously when fires start, there can be much more damaging to the house than some water damage, right? So like I said, when you're purchasing an older home, definitely do your due diligence when it comes to the electrical, because as time goes by, the electrical gets much better, much more efficient on homes. But any sort of, even a small amount of knob and tube can be extremely dangerous for a home if it's not remediated or not addressed properly.
Okay. And you touched on water damage. So clay sewers, I had a property that had clay sewers and it kept backing up into the furnace room.
Right.
In that situation, let's just say it got out of hand and the basement flooded with sewage.
Right.
Is that something that could be excluded because it's clay? Because the sewer's clay?
So typically the damage would be covered. In any insurance claim, what the cause of loss or what fails to cause the loss is typically not covered. So even if that's a PVC piping or some sort of plastic, if it fails, the actual pipe itself is not covered in an insurance claim. The resulting damage is what's picked up by your policy.
Sure.
But what we're seeing, especially in some of these older cities, is it wasn't uncommon for every house to have that clay piping, right?
Yeah.
And now that stuff is reaching its expected life expectancy of, say 50, 60, 70 years.
Yeah.
And it is starting to fail. So typically you need some sort of additional coverage, or need to ensure that your policy covers the lines that run from the house to the street and to the municipal lines. Some companies cover them, some companies don't. But generally speaking, the resulting damage, so a sewer backup or a water damage claim as a result of those things failing, would be covered by the policy. Just ensure that you have the appropriate sewer backup limits, water damage coverage. Make sure that's not excluded, especially if it's a property under renovations or things like that. So
sure. And I think last time we spoke, you had suggested 50,000 for a sewer backup limit. Is that right?
I would say that's the minimum these days. That's kind of my starting point with clients when talking to them. Anything less than that, what we're seeing is the initial emergency services and mitigation to get that sort of under control. That stuff can be quite costly, especially with COVID going on.
Yeah,
they're making some extra cleaning mandatory in regards to equipment and things like that, which obviously comes at a cost to the overall claim. So I would say on even a small home that if you have less than 50,000, you are at risk of having to pay out of pocket if the claim goes over that amount, which is not unreasonable to see that happen.
Okay. Airbnb, home insurance for that. Right now, obviously Airbnb has been hit with a bit of like people who own Airbnbs have been a bit unfortunate because of COVID and whatnot, or it's been a bit unfortunate, I should say.
Yeah.
So what are you seeing on that end from an insurance perspective?
Yeah, the insurance market's tightened up pretty hard on that stuff for the same reasons, the same risks that we're seeing with any company or any business, right? The exposure of someone potentially catching COVID or some sort of disease while being in the property, and the liability issues that surround that. A lot of companies have, in the past, there was quite a few markets that would write Airbnbs. A lot of them, from what I can see and my understanding, they're just kind of putting a pause on that until everything settles. Their concern is that, if someone is to be in your property and contract the virus, that there could be some liability issues or liability suits brought against the owner of the property. We do still have a couple markets that are entertaining that stuff and doing it quite competitively. I think they see the opportunity to maybe grow their market share in that space.
Yep.
And knowing that, at some point this has to come to an end. But yeah, there's definitely solutions out there. There's a lot more underwriting that goes into it. They want to see that people are doing their part to make sure that these properties are cleaned and inspected and things like that. Yeah, we've definitely seen a shift in that market, and really just seeing a lot of companies put pause on their underwriting for that stuff.
And so are you saying you've seen an increase in the insurance premiums for Airbnbs in the last year?
What we're seeing, we've seen property rates increase overall the last few years with the increase in weather events, with the increase of different events, different perils, as we like to call them, causing the cost of insurance to go up. What we're really seeing lately with the market in general is the cost to rebuild these homes has skyrocketed, right? With materials becoming scarce.
Yep.
So that directly falls into Airbnbs as well as other properties. But what we're still seeing really competitive rates in relativity on the Airbnb side. But what people are experiencing is a general increase to their property insurance rates for a variety of reasons. Namely being recently just the cost to rebuild based on building supplies.
Interesting. I never actually thought of that. So basically because of COVID, there's the materials have become more scarce.
Right.
And for that reason, there's been an increase in the price of materials. So the cost to rebuild has increased, and therefore insurance companies have had to adjust their policies to reflect that price as well. Absolutely.
So what we're seeing, one area, any policy that has a co-insurance clause, and not to get overly technical here, but there's some policies that require you to insure your building to its full rebuild value. If you don't, then you pay a penalty. So that clause might be the building must be insured for 80% of its rebuild value or 90% of its rebuild value, or you pay a penalty. There is a little bit of wiggle room there. Yeah. But what we're seeing is that, say you were obligated to insure your home, say the home was $100,000 to rebuild. You have it insured for $100,000, and so you're not in violation of the clause, or so you think. But now the price of lumber has doubled. So now really to rebuild this home, it's $150,000, say.
Yeah.
Now you're in violation of this clause, and even though you didn't do it intentionally, and even though your insurance broker didn't do it intentionally, and no one's really at fault, the house is in violation of the co-insurance clause now. And now you are not going to get the full amount it costs to rebuild the home. You're actually going to get less than even what you had it insured for, because you pay a penalty for not insuring it to the full value. So something to be aware of. We're doing our best to educate our clients on this and really take a look at rebuild values of homes and get those up to where they need to be. It's kind of a roller coaster with regards to building materials, right? So one day it could be fine. The next day, we almost see the rebuild costs like gas costs right now. One day you go to get gas, it's $1 a liter. The next day it's $1.30. It's very fluctuating. It's a roller coaster right now, right? Yeah. So hopefully this virus goes away sooner than later, and all that stuff becomes a lot more stable as we've seen in the past. But something to be aware of, especially if you haven't seen your building limit increased or evaluated with your broker in the past couple years. Definitely reach out to your insurance broker and make sure that your building limit is, a very healthy number and not cutting any corners to keep that value down.
There you go. That's a good piece of advice. So yeah, just make sure to reach out to your broker and have them analyze your policy to see if your rebuild costs are where they should be.
Right. Yeah, because that's kind of the biggest area where we see clients getting themselves in trouble right now. And it's not intentional by the broker or by them, but it's definitely causing some headaches and some challenges on our end for sure.
Okay, good to know. And maybe last thing we'll touch on student rental insurance or rooming houses. What are you seeing there? If you could just tell us a little bit about your perspective.
Yeah, so what we're seeing there is it's not as bad as people think. A lot of people still have students, maybe at a reduced number, but there's still properties that are being filled. A lot of schools that have programs that require in-class learning or labs or things like that, they're doing well. People have been converting their student rentals to just a regular family rental in the short term to get through this. But definitely contact your broker if you've had a change in your occupancy. There might be a small amount of savings in regards to what you're paying to cover your rental income, or what the overall use of the house is. If we've seen people turn a portion of the house into Airbnbs, we've seen people have a mix of professionals, students, maybe one unit is rented to a couple or a small family or something like that. The best thing to do is always just communicate with your broker, just to make sure that everything's good to go. Typically, it's not an issue, but we're still seeing a regular inquiries about student rentals. So I think there's a lot of people that see an opportunity long term to get in now. If maybe people are panicking and selling these student rentals at a discounted rate or a good deal. So yeah, I haven't seen much change. I thought it was going to be much worse when this thing all started, but it seems to be doing okay.
Cool. That's good to hear.
Yeah, for
definitely.
sure.
And for those that are listening, just in case you're not aware for some reason, but it's very important to have the right policy in place. If you do have a student rental or a rooming house, don't just go for like standard home insurance. There's a specific policy for that type of property.
Right. Yeah. Anytime you have unrelated individuals sharing any sort of space, common elements, definitely inquire with your insurance broker to make sure that you're insured properly. We've seen, especially these days with, people losing their jobs or trying to make their living as affordable as possible. We're even seeing situations where a couple has a roommate with them or a family has another roommate with them, and that can cause issues when it comes to a claim. So it's just a matter of speaking with someone to make sure that you're covered properly.
Cool. Okay, perfect. Anything else you want to add before we move on to the next section?
No, I think, like I've said, the key is just communication. So don't be afraid to contact your insurance broker, even just to run some hypothetical situations by them. Anyone I know would be more than happy to make sure that you're covered properly, or put your mind at ease to make sure that you're still good to go.
Cool. Kyle, thank you. Let's go on to the random five. So you've done this before. Round two for you. Question number one, if you were offered the position of mayor of your city, would you take it?
Yeah, so I live in Caledonia, Ontario. So some of you may know the ongoing land disputes and other issues that we face out there. So it could be a challenging job to take. I know our mayor takes a lot of heat for various reasons, but yeah, I think it'd be a great role. It's a great city to live in, and it'd be an honor to be the mayor of that city for sure.
Cool. All right. Number two, if you inherited or won $1 million, what's the very first thing you do with the money?
The first thing I would do with that money is probably just take a breath, make sure I don't make any irrational decisions, but definitely put that money to work, whether it's through real estate, various other ways to invest that money, but just be smart with it and live off the proceeds of that million instead of spending directly into that million.
Awesome. That's a great thing to say and great way to think. How old is your pet?
So I have a French bulldog named Louise, and she is 4 years old.
Nice.
Yeah.
Cool. I like French bulldogs
for sure.
Yeah. That's
yeah.
Cool.
They're
I like that she has a French name too.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. And number four, what's your favorite smell?
My favorite smell, I guess, is like I like citrusy stuff. So whether it's a drink or like a freshly cleaned house, I love that citrus clean smell.
Yeah.
It's just nice and fresh, right?
Cool. Okay. And number five, what success principle do you live by?
Just don't live beyond your means, right? So there's nothing wrong with living an extravagant life and buying expensive things and doing expensive things. Just make sure you can afford it. So I think if you don't get yourself into financial trouble, that you can avoid a lot of stresses in life. So dream big and work hard to make lots of money, but just don't live beyond those means. And I think that's a good way to live. That's how I try to live my life.
I like that, Kyle. That sounds good. Kyle, how do people reach you, and what the services you provide are pretty obvious, but you can just share that anyway.
Sure. Yeah. So I like to think of myself as a full-time real estate insurance broker. A couple websites that people can check out if they're looking for coverage or advice is rentalpropertyins.ca. There's an option to fill out an application directly there. So that would be for any sort of general rental properties, buildings, things like that. I also have studentrentalinsurance.ca, where if it's student rental related, any inquiries on that website come directly to me. And then, of course, they can reach out directly at Kyle M at acumeninsurance.com. And I'd be more than happy to answer any questions they may have.
Sounds good. Kyle, thank you for joining again. I appreciate you sharing all that stuff you did, and I hope you'll enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you. It was a pleasure being here, and I look forward to our next chat.
Okay, take care.
All right, take care.
Thanks once again for listening to another episode of the Well Off Podcast. Just want to remind you that if you do appreciate the content, all I ask is that you comment, maybe like it if you can on the platform that you're listening to it on, and finally share it with friends and family. I'd love to get the message out there, and it would mean a lot if you can share it. And finally, I just wanted to offer you, as a valued listener, a free copy to the Roadmap to Real Estate Investing, which is a document that I've put together which helps you identify what strategy would best suit your needs at this current time. You go over certain things that are included in this document step by step, and it'll hopefully provide you with some clarity. So have a look. You can go to www.welloff.ca/guide to download your free copy.